This story happened to my younger cousins and I in the year of 2009 during the summer. After my girl cousin's wedding, my younger cousins and I decided that it was too hot and we wanted to go swimming. We asked the OGs if we could go and they said that it was fine as long as we watched the kids and make sure that nothing happens. After some driving, we eventually got to this lake called Lake Josephine in Roseville, Minnesota. What happened there would change our lives forever. We get to the lake at around 8 p.m. and I'd say there was about 12 of us. My two older cousins and I decided to stay on the beach area and to not go in. The rest of the kids decided that they couldn't wait anymore, so they went to swim in the lake. They started swimming and everything was going fine until we see one of my cousins struggling in the water. He was outside of the boundary lines and it looked like he was about to drown. The lifeguard there does nothing but blow out his whistle and tell him to go back in the boundary lines. So then my other cousin that's in the water goes and grabs him back in. By now, the two of them started drowning because the drop-offs are too deep. Some random Hmong guy grabs one of their arms and pulled the both of them back in. We were in debt to that guy and we never knew who he was, but he was just another swimmer. They're both safe now. I wanted to swim now, so I get into the water, and I scold my cousins for swimming outside the boundaries, and I tell them to stay near the shore where we could keep an eye on him because we don't want anything else bad to happen to him. Little did I know, something bad did happen. Not in a state of panic, my little cousins, and when I say little, they were around 12 or 16, they come to ask me and say, "Hey, do you know where Anthony is?" I was thinking, wait, wasn't he in the water with you guys? I mean, he came in with you guys to swim. And they say, yeah, but we think he went out or something. Being the older cousin, I go and check the restrooms just in case he went in there. I go to the restrooms and scout the parking lot to see if he randomly went to get something out of my car. I didn't see him at all. When I got back to the shore, I asked my cousins that remained there on shore if they had seen Anthony at all. They said no, and that's when panic mode started to kick in. All of my cousins got out of the water and fear were in their eyes. My oldest cousin that was there did absolutely nothing when he was there. I mean, he's only a couple of months older than me, but he should still at least do something. To this day, it still bothers me. By now, all of us were getting worried and the little cousins were scared. Time was ticking and we couldn't afford to lose more time. I decided to tell the lifeguard on duty that I was missing my little cousin that was 16 and none of us knew where he went. The lifeguard asked us what clothes he was wearing and I told her that he was wearing a pair of navy blue Hawaiian shorts. Within 3 seconds, she whistled for everyone to get out of the waters. Another lifeguard told me to go with him to the lifehouse so we could announce it on the mic. The lifeguard and I get there and I describe the outfit that he wore, and they announced that if anyone sees Anthony, his family is looking for him. While announcing, lifeguards and swimmers are in the lake searching for the body. The lifeguard on shore announces a code and numbers and instantly, the lifeguard standing next to me dials 911. He dashes out of the house and goes to the shore as well. I'm calling the 911 in fear and wondering what the hell is happening. I couldn't see what was going on outside because I didn't have a view of the scene. I was on the line with the paramedics and stayed on the line until they got there, and then I hung up on them and ran outside to see what was going on at this point. I get to the shore and my girl cousin was standing next to the lifeless body of my little cousin that drowned. I was just in shock because I thought this only happened in the movies. We didn't cry, we just sat there watching the lifeguards and paramedics try to resuscitate him. Nothing worked. His face was pale and we knew what happened. He had passed away. Now, I had to make the call to his parents, which was my uncle, and he has a bit of a temper issue. With the wedding, he was giving up his only daughter, and now he's giving up his youngest son. I finally had the guts to call my aunt. She didn't like to hear the news that I told her. We all decided to meet up at Regent's Hospital. Two of my cousins left the lake with me to go to the hospital, and when we got there, we met up with my uncle and aunt. He started yelling at me right away because I was one of the adults, and right there and then, I started bawling my eyes out, saying that it was an accident and none of us knew that it was going to happen. My aunt yelled at him and told him that it wasn't my fault, and to stop blaming people, and that it was a simple accident. We get into the waiting room and my dad comes a little closer and tells me to go home. I drop off my 2 cousins and then drive back to my place. When I got home, my sister says to me, "Did you hear?" And my body felt so weak. She said, "Anthony passed away." I was sad and didn't have any more tears to cry. I went outside and got some fresh air and thought about how all that happened in a short amount of time. After the drowning at the lake, my uncle, who is a shaman, looked into it, and I'm sure a lot of you know what I'm about to talk about. It was very creepy to me. I was outside and it was dark now. I looked to my right side and I still get spooked about it. When I turned to my right, I saw a silhouette of my cousin that had just drowned. I blinked and it was gone immediately. My 2 cousins that I dropped off after the hospital, they had their own experiences as well. I think it was because we were really close with that cousin that passed away. One cousin saw his face in the sky at night while taking some breather on his roof. The other cousin saw an apparition of Anthony in his closet. I know, scary, right? But a couple of days later, my shaman uncle finds this shaman lady who lets the dead take control of her and record the audio of when Anthony came back and used her as a speaking tool. It was so freaky listening to it. I'll talk about why it happened first and then what the audio said. The reason why it happened was because the lake that we went to, Lake Josephine, was haunted and that there was a spirit down at the bottom of the lake that was stuck. In order for that spirit to go to heaven, it had to make someone take its place. So my cousin Anthony was the vulnerable one and he took Anthony into the water. Remember how earlier one of the cousins went past the boundary line and couldn't get out? Well, it turned out that the spirit was in the lake, tugging on his leg so everyone would focus on him who was drowning, and then it dragged Anthony into the water when no one was looking. That's why no one noticed him when he went missing. The audio was very sad and lifting at the same time. I wish I had a copy of it, but my aunt and uncle have it. In the audio, my uncle was talking and then it switches over to the woman. She started crying and speaking him home. It was Anthony crying through her voice. He started talking and said that he missed his mom. He missed his mom so much. He asked if she remembered the time when they would sit in the kitchen and they would just eat the food that she cooked. He was sad that he died and he didn't want to go. At that point, everyone was in the room was crying. He also said to his brother that he missed him so much and that he was sorry that he was leaving him behind. He didn't want it this way. His brother was the one that went past the boundary lines. After that, he told the cousin that saved his brother that it wasn't his fault and that he was glad that he saved his brother. The cousin was sad and he blamed it on himself because he saved his brother and was the first person to realize that Anthony was gone. Then he told his dad to stop drinking too much and that he doesn't really care about the family. He had to take care of the family now that he was gone. Then he said that he was going to stay with Grandma in heaven so that she won't be so lonely anymore. Before he got out of the shaman's body, he said that he wanted certain items in the coffin and what kind of clothing that he wanted to wear. Moments later, he left and the shaman came back. She said that she was exhausted and that the boy was just too emotional. But then she said that some other people wanted to talk to my shaman uncle as well. These people were my uncle's ancestors. The shaman got back into her trance and eventually these spirits started to talk through her. They yelled at him for never feeding them any food when they came to visit and how he never attends family meetings. They said that it was because of all these things that they took his son away from him. They told him that in this life he was never supposed to have more than 2 kids because he wouldn't be able to financially support more than 2. So they took this kid to make him only have 2 kids. After all of that, we finally did the funeral and the releasing the spirit from the lake for Anthony, and I guess things are back to normal now. It's been a while now, but I won't forget the kid. I love that kid to death and may he rest in peace with my grandparents. We'll all join him someday and I hope to get to see his smile again. This story happened to my older brother. About a year ago, my brother and sister-in-law moved into a studio in South Sacramento. The place was one single building consisting of 20 studios upstairs and downstairs, and it faced a fence and a big willow tree. They had moved into the studio for about a month, and on this particular morning, around 5 a.m., my brother was getting ready to get into his car to go to work. It was still dark outside, and since it was around wintertime, it was so cold that he had to heat up the car before heading out. As he did so, he took one glance at the tree and saw a single white figure. He turned his back to the car and turned around to the tree again, but this time it was gone. He didn't think much of it and left to go to work. My brother eventually got really sick and told my sister-in-law about what he saw. She got mad at him, of course, for not telling her earlier, and then told her mom about what happened. He had a sickness similar to a fever, but when they went to the doctor said that he wasn't sick at all, which was weird. They eventually told my parents and my sister-in-law, and one of her cousins came and did this ritual to see why he was so sick. The cousin told my parents and them that when he saw that white figure, it was during the time when the dead woke up to find food, and he happened to be there at the right time. That was the reason why my brother got so sick when he saw that white figure. When my brother's soul had saw that white figure and turned around, he was already afraid. After that, we did a jingle bell thing for him and my brother got better. But before he got better, he was still sick for a long period of time. They told us that before moving into that studio, their nearby neighbor told them that there was a ghost in that area, but the owner would tell them to ignore him because he was cuckoo in the head. My sister-in-law's mother also had a weird dream about that studio. She dreamt that she was walking in their studio and she saw a lady washing the dishes at their sink. Her mom asked the lady what she was doing there, and the lady replied that she was waiting for the guy that lived in that house, who was my brother. She said that since my sister-in-law didn't love my brother, she was going to take him away to live with her and that she'll love him. The whole time she had her back turned against the mom and she couldn't see who that lady was. After hearing that, the mother got furious and said that the man was her daughter's husband and that she shouldn't wait for him. A while later, my brother and wife finally moved out of that studio. When they finally left the place, they said that they were going to the garden or the store so that whatever was in the house wouldn't follow them to their new place. My aunt told me that when she lived in Thailand, there used to be this thing that would come and visit her. She said that it would peek through the holes in the wall and she'd see red eyes. Back then, they didn't have night lights, so she'll light a candle and whatever it was would blow it out. It would come to visit her every day and so often, and it never went away. When my aunt got married, the thing went away whenever her husband was home, but when he was out of town or if he's out of the house, it would come to visit her. Eventually, my aunt and uncle moved to the States, and my aunt said that on some random nights, their bed will shake and their closet would open and close. One event was that my uncle went out of town for a funeral and she slept home alone with a nightlight on. She said that she heard what sounded like the closet door open, and it opened all the way. In the door, she saw this furry black thing with sharp claws and sharp teeth with red eyes. It was coming towards her. She closed her eyes and she asked her ancestors to come and help her. After she shouted for their help, the thing crawled under the bed and vanished. Ever since then, she hasn't seen it very often, but once in a blue moon, it would stop by, but never anywhere near her. My aunt literally sleeps with a nightlight in every open plug in the room, and she has 2 flashlights. She's always holding one and she has one under her pillow. I always thought she was weird for sleeping like that until she told me this story. Kind of creepy if you ask me. Here's a short story that happened to my sister. My sister roomed with her cousin in their apartment. The apartment, I can say, is truly creepy itself. The kitchen is separated by the living room, which leads to the bedrooms by a small hallway. It's kind of complicated to explain how it looks like, but anyways, my cousin was by herself in the kitchen cooking when she said she saw a lady with long hair and she was wearing similar clothing to my sister, she saw this figure walk into their bedroom. She thought it was my sister and went into the room to tell her to eat, and when she got there was nobody inside of their bedroom. That apartment was really creepy. They also said that their little nephew would just stare off blankly into the hallway and then point out at things and say, "Who's that?" Hearing these stories scared the crap out of us. Here's a scary story from my friend. My friend told me that one of his cousins from Oregon and his friends decided to go fishing late one night. There were about a total of 12 of them, so it was a pretty big group. When they got to their fishing spot, it was already midnight and they were just talking and having a good time. Out of nowhere, they suddenly started to hear clicking sounds. All of them stopped in their tracks to listen to where it came from and what the sound was. They all got freaked out but didn't have the courage to say anything. Then this one particular cousin decided that he was way too scared to stay, so he decided to leave by himself. Before he left, he told everyone that he was going to leave and that he was going home. He said this out loud. As he was driving back home, he continued to hear the clicking sound. He was scared but didn't think too much of it. When he got home, he went straight to bed until he kept on hearing the same eerie clicking sound. As the sun began to rise, he was getting thirsty and got up to get a drink of water. He opened his fridge and got some water, and the only light was coming from the refrigerator. As he lifted up his cup of water to drink, at the corner of his eyes, he saw a little boy, all pale, crouching down in a ball right next to him. After that experience, my friend told me that his cousin got really sick after that event, and his dad and grandpa had to fly to Oregon to Oneng for his cousin. I don't know what happened afterwards, but what I've learned is that you should never make it obvious for something to follow you home. This isn't exactly scary, but a little strange, and it happened to me a while back. When my grandparents went out of state to visit my uncle, I decided to sleep in their room alone for the first night after they left. As I was about to fall asleep, I suddenly felt something at the foot of the bed. I just froze up and was too scared to move. Then I felt as if someone was jumping at the foot of the bed softly. I got so freaked out that I jumped out of the bed as fast as I could and ran out to sleep with my parents. From that night on, I never slept in my grandparents' room all alone. Another thing happened to me not too long ago as well. I'd say about 8 months ago, before my niece was born. I lived with my brother and his wife at their apartment in Sacramento. On this particular day, I was sleeping in the living room like usual. My brother went to work and my sister-in-law was getting ready to leave to go to the doctor. It was around 10 in the morning and I was still very sleepy, but I could hear her getting ready. After she left for a good 5 minutes, I heard the door open and close very softly. Then I felt a gentle breeze blow into my face, and I could swear I felt someone crouched right next down to me, staring and breathing at my face. I was too scared to open my eyes or move, so I pretended to sleep. As soon as I felt safe, I was able to open my eyes and looked around, and by then the sun was already shining through the window door. I could have swore that there was someone there with me. Here's another story that happened to my cousin, who was also my next-door neighbor. It was late one night and he and his girlfriend were driving home from Sacramento. His girlfriend was asleep and he was driving. He saw a lady wearing white with long black hair sitting at the side of the road. She was facing the other direction. My cousin thought it was weird seeing a lady being out so late at night all by herself. As he drove closer to the lady, he decided that he wanted to take a look at her. But as he slowed down and tried to peek, she slowly turned her face the opposite way, like she didn't want him to see her. My cousin got so freaked out that he zoomed home and didn't tell anybody about it until the next day. The ICU I worked at used to be a children's ICU for critically ill kids. Then they built an adjoining section and moved out all the kids and converted that unit into an adult ICU for brain-damaged patients. Anyways, one of the nurses there was checking on a patient at night. She felt something brush against her lab coat. She didn't give it much thought until she felt her lab coat swaying again. She looked down and saw it swinging back and forth by itself, like somebody waist high was stroking and playing with it. Here's another story from the same ICU. When they moved out all the remaining kids to the new ICU, they had to pass a corridor. Every single time one of these kids were moved, all the lights would blink off until they passed through the end of the corridor. One of the nurses finally said out loud, "Don't be scared, we're moving into a new home now, just follow us." Then, after she said that, the corridor lights didn't blink off when the rest of the remaining kids were moved. In some ways, I think it's a little sad that there are these little lost spirits still out there, wandering around. Here's a short, creepy little story that happened to my sister-in-law's niece when she was about 3 years of age. She told me that when her grandmother had passed away in Merced, they decided to take her little niece along with them. During the funeral, the niece needed to use the restroom, and it was a one-stall restroom, so they took her, but she went inside by herself. As she was using the restroom, my sister-in-law and her mom heard their little niece say in Hmong, "Hey, don't mess with me. I didn't do anything to you. Don't mess with me." They knocked on the door and asked who she was talking to, but they didn't get an answer. When the niece finally came out of the bathroom, she told them that an old lady was messing with her in the restroom. They checked in there, but there was nobody inside. My husband told me that when he was still living with his parents in Wisconsin, they moved into a new home. When they moved in, they found that the garage was full of stuff, furniture, clothes, toys, food, etc. They asked the manager, and the manager told them that the previous tenant left without informing the manager and left all their stuff behind as well. His parents thought that it was kind of strange and weird. After that, weird things started to happen in the house after they moved in. There's a little shack in the backyard, and they'll find long strands of hair all around it. It looked as though the hair was coming from underground. He and his sisters would also experience a lot of weird stuff too. They had a doll the size of a toddler, and one time, the sister was sleeping when the doll was facing the wall. She sensed that something was watching her, and when she opened her eyes, the doll was facing her. Then, one day, my husband was playing hide-and-seek with his sisters. He went to hide under the blanket, and as soon as he settled in, he felt something heavy sit on him. He couldn't move or breathe for a few seconds, and when he finally broke free, he looked around, but there was no one. No one really knows what happened in that house, and they moved out soon after. I lost my niece to cancer in June of 2010. The night before I got the call from my sister, I dreamt of my niece. We were having a fun time just talking and laughing, joking and chasing each other around, and playing house and store. Then she told me she had to leave because her mommy was calling her to come home. We said our goodbyes, and I told her I love her very much and I'll come to visit her very soon. I felt this overwhelming sadness when she left. I started to cry, then I heard my phone ring and woke me up. I answered my phone, and it was my sister. She told me that her daughter is in the hospital because every 30 minutes my sister had to change her daughter's diaper because she wouldn't stop pooping. It was a sign that her body was starting to shut down very slowly. My niece wanted to talk to me, so my sister handed her the phone. My niece said to me, "Auntie, you told me you were going to come visit me before I went home. How come you lied to me? You liar." That's when I broke down in tears, knowing that she came to visit me in my dream. She was mad at me and didn't want to talk to me anymore, so she handed her mom the phone. My sister said that the doctor told her my niece probably has a few more hours left with us. My sister told me that all of her siblings were there and that I was the only one who wasn't there yet. She knew my niece was waiting for me to come and see her. My husband and I flew out that afternoon. We didn't arrive there until midnight. When we got there, I just cried my eyes out. She didn't look normal. I've never seen any person the way she looked. My husband's mother passed away with cancer and she didn't look like my niece. My niece was already purple, like as if she's been dead for a day or two. She wasn't talking anymore like she did that early morning when I talked to her on the phone. After about an hour of bawling my eyes out, I got really thirsty. I went to get a glass of water in the kitchen. I heard a little voice come close to my ear saying, "Auntie, come back. I miss you. Don't leave yet." I dropped my glass of water and turned around and didn't see anybody. I thought it was her little sister because they were all running around, but they were nowhere close to the kitchen. I power walked really fast to her bedroom because in a way I was kind of freaked out, and yet at the same time I was scared that I might not see her leave. After a long flight, my husband was exhausted and decided to sleep in the guest room. As he was laying there, someone or something kept on tickling his feet and wouldn't let him sleep. So because of this, he got up and decided to hang out with us in the room. He didn't tell me about this until the next day. He didn't want to creep me out. Anyways, at around 2 a.m., I said to my little niece, "I see that you're suffering. I don't want to see you hurting anymore. I know I told you I was coming to visit you when we were playing last night. I'm here now. You don't have to wait anymore. Don't be afraid to leave. Don't be afraid that we're going to be mad at you if you leave. We love you very much and we won't get mad if you leave. As much as we want you to stay, you can't because God wants you back. He'll love you more than us. And don't be afraid that you're going to be lonely because your grandpa is there waiting for you." After I said all of those things to her, her breathing changed to short little breaths. She took her last 3 deep breaths and she was gone. My sister and brother-in-law called all the uncles to come right after her passing. They were discussing over the plans of when they should hold her funeral while her body was still in the room. The whole time, she had this very angry face. Her face was all twisted up because they wanted to wait until one of the grandpas came back from my wedding in the mid of July to do her funeral. My husband and I weren't able to stay after the 12th of July. They were talking about me and my brothers that came out of state. As soon as they mentioned my name, her face relaxed and it almost seemed like she was smiling. So I guess she had spoken to them even after her death. When they looked at her face, they knew what she wanted and they did the funeral the week before we all had to leave. I don't feel her around me. I guess we had to say what we wanted to each other, but my sisters and mom still feel her presence around them to this day. Condolences to this person and their family. This was a real sad story. My cousin, who is also my best friend, moved down to SoCal for college when we graduated. I ended up going to college in town. He moved in with his older brother and their friends in a small 2-story apartment complex. It was like a month into it and he told me about the weird things that happened at that place. First, they have a friend who is deathly scared of dolls. Every kind of dolls, Barbies, bears, and especially the baby ones that are supposed to open its eyes when you lift it up. He's scared of dolls because once they had some family visiting them and a little sister came. The sister had a doll she took with her with little red hair. He was sleeping on the couch when everyone had left to get dinner when he hears little feet running across the floor. He's kind of still sleepy, so he only opens his eyes a crack and he sees the doll running from one side of the room to the other. When he sits up, the doll drops to the carpet and stops moving right where it was running. Also, he says that he's been woken up by what he thought was kids jumping on his bed. He could hear them laughing and feel his bed bouncing a lot. When he sat up on the bed, it was still shaking, but then it stopped. The last one is when his uncles came down to party and drink. After some partying, one of the people got tired and went to sleep in one of the bedrooms while the others continued drinking. One uncle, our cousin we'll call Shrimp, and a family friend were sleeping in a room with 2 beds. There was one guy in each bed and one guy on the floor. My family friend and Shrimp were still kind of talking about life with their eyes closed because they were drunk and tired when one of the uncles yelled and ran from the room. The two of them also ran out after him, and you know how it goes. When one person screams, everyone else gets scared and screams. So they all run out, and the uncle says that when they were talking about life, he heard the closet open, and when he opened his eyes to look, he saw an old, grandfatherly-like person get out of the closet and started to walk towards him. Except the thing wasn't walking, it was floating, and it came directly above him by the ceiling fan. That's when he screamed and ran. I've stayed at their place once, but didn't notice anything too strange, except for the Lord of the Rings poster that they had to cover up the hole in the wall. Here's another story that I have from a much younger cousin. His grandma, on his mom's side, passed away when he was only around 4 or 5 years old. After the funeral, everyone was at the deceased grandma's apartment, cooking and eating and doing all that stuff. He told me that while he was walking through the hallway to go to the bedroom and play video games, he noticed that the picture of the grandma on the wall was crying. I asked him if it was clear teardrops, and he said that no. It was like the ink was melting from where the eyes were, so it looked like black teardrops. He pointed it out to an older cousin, and they called the parents and aunts and uncles to all come over. He says he still remembers how the adults were crying and scared, and how all of a sudden, the kids were made to go to bed. I heard this story from one of the older guys at church, and by old I mean 50 years old or so. He said that there was a Hmong man from America who went to Thailand and Laos to look for a second wife. He was spending money, having fun, and talking up to a lot of young girls that are trying to get to America. So one night, they are eating at the house in a village, and he needs to go do number 2. But since he doesn't want to walk all the way to the outhouse, he walks over to some woods and does his business over there. Well, as he stayed in the country longer, he started to get sicker and sicker until he asked his wife in America to send him money so he can come home. Because she's a faithful wife, although I hate stories like this, she sends him the money to come back. When he gets back to the States, it wasn't too long before his sickness overcomes him and he passed away. They said that when they did the autopsy, his guts had all rotted out. Hmong people say that it's because he did his business over a grave and that the thing already put its hands up and pulled out and ate his insides that night. He was just living with limited time after that. Okay, here's another story. Have you guys heard about the seeing ghost trick? Some people say that you look under your armpit, but the elders have told me that you look under your legs when walking down a hallway. They say by doing that, you are viewing through a portal to another realm. The thing is that it's alright as long as the inhabitants of the other realm don't notice you. If they look at you and see you, it might be something that you'll regret. They told me that what you have to do is pretend that you're not looking. Pretend like you're tying your shoes or that you're picking something up. Trust me, try it. But something completely unrelated to this, my aunt told me of another story. The story goes of a Hmong guy that went to the Table Mountain Casino. If anyone has gone, there's a narrow and windy road to get to the casino. He was going pretty fast and was stopped by a cop and given a ticket. When he later went to court, the judge asked him how he got the ticket because the officer had been dead for 4 years. This past weekend, when I went to Fresno for my sister's wedding, my niece was there with her toddler and told me of a creepy story that happened to her baby. She told me that for the past weeks or so, her baby has been crying hysterically for no reason. She would cry until my niece had her eyes open, and then she would stop. This was happening almost every single night, and one day she decided to call her sister and ask their shaman friend to look into it. The shaman friend had to go to his altar and start to do this ritual when he saw the details of what was causing her baby to cry. The shaman asked my niece if they had took her baby to this river place and were they in a hurry to come back home. My niece replied saying that when the baby was only 7 months old, they did indeed take her to a river, and when they came home, they were rushing. The shaman said that because the baby's soul was still very vulnerable to the spirit world, this little mega troll-like spirit that wandered the river saw her baby and got attached to the baby. When they were rushing home, they jumped a little ditch and my niece's husband dropped the baby's blanket. My niece picked it up, and what that was when the troll-like spirit took the blanket as well. The spirit followed them home, therefore, every night it would come and play with their baby, who was about 9 months now. The shaman then took all of his guides with him to the original place, the river. While he was getting to the river, he and his guides were stopped by the spirit that protects the land there, and he told them that they were not there to cause any problems, but to find out what happened to one of the friend's spirit. When he got to the ditch where they dropped the blanket, he saw a troll-like or hunchback spirit wandering around. I'm not sure if he spoke to it, but what he did was block the pathway to my niece's house so that the spirit could not find them, and asked them to oneng to really fix the issue. So this past weekend was the reason why they were in town to have their step-grandma oneng for their baby. It was so creepy when she told us of what happened. She didn't know that you're not supposed to take a baby that young to places like that, but you live to learn. So back in Laos, there was an old guy who was on his way to a funeral. He had to go through some forests since Laos was just full of woodlands in between villages. On the way, he heard a baby cry on the side of the road. So he stopped and peeked into the woods. He saw a little child holding a baby. They looked human, but weren't. He knew right away that they weren't, but they looked helpless and non-threatening. "Why is the baby crying?" the man asked the nanny toddler. "Oh, that's because Mom and Dad are out to a feast," the toddler replied without looking up at the man. "Where are they at now?" "Way over that village," she pointed. "Well, I'm going over there," the man said. "Can you please tell them to hurry back? Tell them that the baby's crying." "Sure, but how do I know which ones they are?" Here, you take this leaf and put it in your mouth when you get there. You'll see them and you'll just know." The toddler handed the man a strange leaf. The man took it, thanked the toddler, and walked off. "Please, tell them to hurry back and that the baby is crying," the toddler yelled after the man. As the man was approaching the funeral scene, the man put the leaf inside of his mouth. He saw lots of ghosts chasing one another, jumping all over the pots of boiled food, in the rice steamers, and over and under the wooden stand for the dead. They were dipping their arms into the woks, pots, and steamers for food, and eating and taking food from one another. The other humans didn't seem to notice these activities. "The child says that the baby has been crying and that you should hurry back now," said the man, raising his voice and yelling out to the spirits. Suddenly, they all disappeared. The man noticed that the leaf in his mouth had been snatched away. Here's a story about my cousins. My auntie bought this one house by Dale and Larpenture in Maplewood, St. Paul, Minnesota. They didn't know that it was haunted, so they bought it because her husband and her were starting off fresh. They settled in the house with 3 children and 1 more on the way. At times, during the day, they would hear footsteps coming upstairs. They would hear these footsteps coming up the stairs, and sometimes just someone walking downstairs because it was non-carpeted. They talked to this one psychic lady and asked her what was wrong with the house. The lady said that when the last couple lived there, there was an old couple, and the older woman slipped and fell down in the bathroom downstairs. They were very afraid when they found out about this discovery. They also learned that it was bad for the baby inside of her belly to be around this house because the woman who passed away could do some bad things to her. The family couldn't really do anything about moving out of that house because they have been living there for a year now. They've settled down in that house already, and my cousin stayed with my auntie to make her feel better. After giving birth to a baby boy, they'd leave the house within 3 months and move to Frogtown. The scary thing was that when they were at their old house, the psychic lady said that during the day, the old lady would come upstairs and play with the Barbie dolls and watch the 2 little girls in the living room. One day, my grandma got really sick and my grandpa found her passed out. The paramedics had to come and take her away. When my grandma died in the hospital, everyone went back to the house, and my little cousin said that my grandma wasn't dead because she saw my grandma leave the house with an old man. He said that he had seen her leaving, so she would be coming back and that she's not dead. One of my aunts said that maybe Grandma was with us and that we just couldn't see her. As soon as my aunt said that, my grandma's sister, who came to visit, said that she saw somebody in my grandma's garden in the backyard and said that she looked exactly like my grandma. Everyone ran to the window and looked out in the backyard. There was this old woman out there picking hot peppers. My family ran out there to see if it was my grandma, but it wasn't. Instead, it was her friend from down the street who didn't know that my grandma had passed away, and she had come to get veggies from my grandma's garden. Well, talk about Hmong people. Anyways, that's the end of the video. Thank you guys for listening.